Hey everyone, welcome back to the Other Side Chronicles. This is Steven, your host as usual, and thanks for tuning back in. As we talked about last time, we got a great show planned for this week with one of your favorite subjects that you've been asking for, and so we're going to be talking about UFOs today. And I have a couple esteemed guests with me today. Steve Edmiston. It's Edmiston. That's a tough one, Steve, by the way.
It is a tough one. It's phonetic. It should be easy. It is incredibly hard to
I
get right.
like practiced it for like five
Nailed
minutes.
it. You nailed it.
Edmiston. Anyway, I'll do my best. I'll just how about if I call you Steve? which is what your name is.
I should just change my name. Like my professional name should be Steve Stevens.
Well, my last name is Sherrick, and not one person in the history of my life has ever pronounced it correctly. So there you go.
I don't mind. I don't care.
All right, and Scott Schaefer. Hey, Scott.
Hey, good to be here, Stephen.
Well, I'm gonna give a quick intro. I'm not gonna. I could go on forever. So I'm sorry if I leave out a bunch of stuff. I'll start with Scott. He's a three-time National Emmy Award-winning writer. Including shows Bill Nye the Science Guy, one of our local heroes. He's been a director to producer, over 40 years experience in media, including 6 years working in the trenches of Hollywood. He does some local stuff here. I see him around Burien doing all kinds of cool stuff, including South King Media and award-winning B-Town Burien blog, which is for all you locals, I'm sure you're familiar with that. Been involved in a lot of shows. One that I've been checking out here just lately, the show called Sightings, which ran from I think 92 to 98. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, I was there, I think, in 93. So
okay. So and it looked like there was a full range of topics, and we'll get to that later. And then Steve is a business and entertainment lawyer at Brace Point Law, indie film screenwriter and producer, and he was the screenwriter and co-producer of the film that we're going to be focusing on today, the Maury Island Incident. It's a short film chronicling the true story of Harold Dahl and his alleged 1947 sightings of a UFO over Puget Sound. He's also the co-founder of the Men in Black Birthday Bash, which I had no idea even existed, but I'm excited to hear about that at some point. Anyway, lots of other things for both of them. I could go on and on, but we need to get to the meat of this show, which we're going to be talking about that film. So I did watch the film, enjoyed it thoroughly. It was very well done. So I guess let's just start off with kind of the origin story of the film and how you two got involved with it.
I think this is Steve's cue to go.
Okay, we're so polite to each other. We just sort of like go, no, after you.
This is not a place for politeness in this show.
Yeah. But chronologically, that probably does make sense. I basically have lived all my life in this community, the Des Moines, Burien area. Went away to colleges for a while, but came back. And the origin story of the film is kind of interesting because I'd never heard the story at all. I forget the film. I'd never heard about the Maury Island Incident story And I, have lived not only in this community forever, but in the Woodmont area of Des Moines, where we look right out at Maury. I mean, it is our neighbor. It is a people kayak back and forth. I mean, that's it's not far. And I have lived in this neighborhood since 1987. And in 2012, I'd never heard this story, but I was watching a documentary on Ken Burns, a documentary on prohibition, right? So off
Hey,
topic.
Steve, can I stop you one real quick? I do have people being that I've got a few relatives that actually tune in from outside the Seattle area. Where based on Seattle, Puget Sound, a lot of people have heard about Vashon. Where is this island exactly? Where does it set as far as where Seattle?
So a lot of people who aren't from here, if you think of SeaTac Airport, right, they kind of know that as a marker. And so you got Seattle and you go south of SeaTac Airport, in those communities just south of SeaTac. So that would include Des Moines, my city. Those communities are directly east of Maury Island. So we look to the west, and there's Vashon Maury Island right across Puget Sound.
Got
So
it.
that's kind of that's how we triangulate to that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So 2012, I'm watching a documentary on prohibition, and my neighbor and I are in a coffee shop because we're talking about it because we kind of love local history. And we couldn't believe that we'd never heard of this guy named Roy Olmsted, the good bootlegger. We had this great Pacific Northwest bootlegging story, and we'd never heard about it. And that really made us mad. And we're in a coffee shop, and in coffee shops, we've all been there. People listen to your conversations, and if it's interesting enough to them, they will lean in and they will ask you something, or and that happened. We're talking about this prohibition story, and a guy who we don't know who he is today, we kind of call him Deep Throat. He says, "Oh, you like local history? You must know about the Maury Island incident. UFOs, Puget Sound, maybe in the 1950s." He kind of gave a little description, and we had never heard of it. And of course, we did what Seattleites always seem to do, which is the freeze. We were like, "Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you for interrupting us. Very kind of you to do that." And we're going to kind of go back to our conversation. And that thing. And the thing was, though, I went home and it bugged me that I'd never heard this story. So I get on the internet and I do some research and kind of get the basics of the Maury Island Incident UFO story. And that was in 2012. And in 2013, my neighbor and I were so annoyed that nobody had heard the story. We talked to all our neighbors. Nobody ever heard of this before. We had the bright idea that we would throw a party, a community party at our beach shared property. And we would make a fictional historical society. We called it the Maury Island Incident Historical Society. And we would hold an annual meeting of that society as a piece of performance art where we would have Robert's Rules of Order, and we would pretend we've been doing this for 65 years and tell the story of Maury Island to all of our neighbors. And at the end of this party, we would burn. My neighbor promised to make a flying saucer of some sort and unveil it, and we would burn it, kind of like a Burning Man type of thing. And quickly, the party became known as Burning Saucer. Anyway, been doing that one for now 13 years. Scott Schaefer attended that first party. And you came up to me afterwards. And what happened when you came up to me after this party? What did you do?
I said to you, and I'm still sincere about this, that you gave one of the best pitches for a film I'd ever heard before. And he did. Steve's a great speaker. That's why he does this Humanities Washington tour and speaks. And it helps, the law experience, being in courtrooms, having to speak and think on your feet. So Steve is a great speaker. He did a great presentation. And I think we left it at, well, we should talk about doing a film. And so I think over the next maybe 3 to 6 months.
Fast, very fast in film world. Yes.
Yeah, we started meeting and we put together like a PowerPoint. And then because I run the B-Town blog, I did a story about how we were going to have a pitch presentation at the Tin Room Theater. And we opened it up and I think it was a pretty full house. But the important thing was that we did a pitch, and Steve, of course, had a PowerPoint by then, and we had some clips of things that we liked, kind of to set the mood. And then afterwards, we heard somebody wanted to talk to us about financing the film, to be our angel investor. And that was a guy named John White. And he committed to it. And then we were, I think, within a couple of months, we were actually in production.
Yeah, very fast.
Which I never get invited to these kind of parties. What's the deal?
Well, you're invited this year, man.
I will be there. I'll be there with bells on.
We've got a lot of events this year, so we'll make sure you know all about it. And you can share it around. It's super fun. But
Okay.
that's the origin story of the movie. That's literally how, and that's not that unusual. People that want to be in film world, you've got to come up with an idea first, and then you've got to figure out how that translates to the screen, and then you've got to figure out which is, what Orson Welles used to always complain about. 97% of my life is raising money.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Figure out how to finance it. And we were very, very fortunate that John was at that meeting, and fell in love and wanted to make a movie. That was just an amazing. I wish I could replicate it like that, but you can't. You don't have that ease of access to financing.
So, from watching the film, hearing a little bit about this, so there was it classified documents, or finally getting your head on declassified documents that the FBI had that kind of pushed things forward, correct? Am I right there?
Yes, to me is the, Scott's a Directors Guild of America member. Scott came, certainly came at this from the perspective of a director, but he's also a director, like many of the creative directors that are also writers. I mean, they want to tell the story, and they want to get involved in the story at the beginning. As a writer, my role here would be, as a writer, I was, and maybe it's the bias from being a lawyer, I was looking for a hook that said, look, we're not just going to go do kind of one of those cheesy documentary type shows that you see where somebody picks up a rock and the music goes, oh, and then they say, could it be an alien? Could it be? That drives me nuts. I want something that's really meaty and true. And so when we started researching the story, and we learned so much about it, and that we learned that unlike maybe any other UFO story in anywhere, that we had this incredible FBI investigator in 1947 named Jack Wilcox, who I cannot stop thinking of as our Agent Mulder, handling essentially the first X-File in history. And he had a daily, habit of writing detailed memos and teletypes. We had this treasure trove of actual FBI records investigating this story. And that's what hooked me as a writer. I said, if we can use the FBI documents as the spine of the story, we got to fill in blanks. I mean, if there's a meeting between J. Edgar Hoover and somebody and nobody knows what they said, that's our job. We got to fill in what they said. It's a movie. We have to. But if we can use FBI records to kind of frame the storytelling, that really excited me. That was really inspiring as a writer, creator, to have that source material. And we did. Thank you to Jack Wilcox, Agent Jack Wilcox, lowly FBI agent in the gulag of the FBI in 1947. Tacoma, Washington. How you couldn't be farther from the power center.
So, I mean, most everybody, I'm sure not everybody, but most everybody has heard of Roswell, right? I mean, that's that. So why, when I listen to the story and I hear you all talk, and I've watched the film, done a little of my own research, how come this story got buried to where no one's heard of? Literally, people that live here have not heard of it, but the Roswell thing blew up and took off and has all this following. What happened to this? How come this story got buried?
Well, I have an opinion, but maybe Scott does too.
I'll give you my opinion. I worked on the show Sightings, so I studied UFOs. I went down the rabbit hole in the early 90s. And so I was so into it. I would, when I was traveling, directing for Sightings, field directing, going out and doing segments, I would bring my little PowerBook computer and modem, and I had a CompuServe account, and I loved CompuServe because they had forums. And this is all pre-World Wide Web, 93, so it was dial-up. And so that's when I learned about the Maury Island incident. And getting to your question, why it was suppressed is because once it was labeled a hoax, it was just kind of forgotten. And all the documents pertaining to it, the memos from Wilcox to J. Edgar Hoover was involved. Those were all just, classified and put away for 50 years till 1997. So when I worked on Sightings, all we knew about the Maury Island incident was, oh yeah, that was a hoax. Two Air Force officers died in a B-25 crash, and these hoaxsters ruined their families' lives, and they all feel terrible. And so we didn't have access to the FBI documents. So once we got those documents, and it appears to me that nobody really was looking at them like we did. Steve's got a huge binder that's just jammed with these things. And so just going through and parsing it and digesting and finding out what really happened. And then I'll let Steve address, the Wilcox memo where he challenged Hoover, wanted to dismiss it as a hoax. And Agent Wilcox stood up to him and sent him a memo. Steve, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So you got this UFO sighting at the beginning of the summer on June 21, and you've got, the whole summer of the saucers, and you got Roswell happens and Ken Arnold's sighting happens. And these are all in late June and early July, and thousands of sightings around the country. And then you've got this period at the end of the summer of 1947 where all the government agencies are actually investigating these sightings. They're taking it seriously because we have a new enemy. We're fighting the Cold War now against the Soviet Union. And so if people are seeing things in the sky, that could actually be Soviet technology, and we're worried about it. So the Army and the Air Force, Army Air Force and the CIA and the FBI were taking it very seriously. And so during the investigation, Scott mentioned there's a plane crash. It's just this crazy story. Harold Dahl, the primary witness. So, imagine whatever UFO story you imagine, there's somebody who says, I saw this thing, right? So he's got a primary witness. And Harold Dahl, during the course of this summer, at the beginning of which he alleged that Men in Black approached him and warned him not to talk and all that kind of stuff, Harold Dahl began to make a decision, and the documents in the FBI record really track this. He'd been so ridiculed during that summer for being crazy because he said he saw a UFO. So and terrible things were happening. The Men in Black in the early summer had warned Harold that bad things would happen to you, and bad things were happening to Harold. And so by the end of the summer, when they decide it's time to investigate Harold, he wants out of this. He doesn't want anything to do with the UFO story at all. He's not saying that it was a hoax. He's just saying, I wish this had never happened to me. And I don't want to be, this person that people make fun of. And I don't want bad things happening to my business and all this stuff. So then we get to this point where there's a plane crash at the end of August and tragedy happens. And so the pressure, this is why it's a great film, great story. The pressure is so high, and Harold makes a choice. And this is the key. If we could Vulcan mind meld everybody that loves UFO stories and have them understand this one point, we would do it. Harold makes a decision as the witness that he'd rather be known as a liar than someone who saw a UFO. He actually makes a choice to say, I want to call myself the biggest liar that ever lived, and that I made this all up, because that's better for me than being a crazy person that says they saw a UFO. I want to get rid of the crazy person. And the FBI records, the Jack Wilcox reports, document that on a daily basis, that this is what Harold chose to do. So we get to August 14th of 1947. J. Edgar Hoover is personally involved in the investigation, and J. Edgar Hoover sends a teletype to our hero, Jack Wilcox, and says, well, sounds like he's saying he made it all up so we can close the case. And here's Jack Wilcox, our hero, 3 hours later, sends a teletype to J. Edgar Hoover, maybe the most powerful man on the planet in 1947, right? At this point. And he corrects J. Edgar Hoover and tells him he's wrong. And that Wilcox did not confess to a hoax. But he's now going to call himself a liar because that's a preferred path. He would rather just be a liar and a hoaxster. You know, he'll live with that. He doesn't want to be someone who's thought of as crazy. So once we got into those documents, we realized the entire narrative about Maury Island being a hoax is wrong. There is no counter narrative. There's none. That's it. This is the only story in the FBI records.
But there's more to the story, right? As far as reasons why he supposedly made that decision, not just because he was being ridiculed, but also because there was pressure on him from outside sources that scared him too, correct? Which brings us to the Men in Black.
100%. Yes. That is actually, yes.
You say that, of course, everyone lights up and starts thinking about the film. That was it was actually it was a fun film, the original one. I enjoyed that. But so how does that feel? You know, how do you think that is part of his decision making? Because there was threats, right?
That's all, and that's all recorded in the FBI interviews. I mean, he was threatened by this Men in Black on June 22nd, early in the summer, the day after he saw the saucers, and then bad things happened to him. His wife became mysteriously ill. His business was vandalized. His son Charles, allegedly mysteriously disappeared for 2 weeks, and they found him in Lusk, Montana, with no memory of why he was there. Just weird, bad things.
And his son had been part of the sighting.
Yes, that's correct.
There. Yeah. Okay.
So Harold, you know, if you think of it as a just entertainment, Harold was under incredible pressure. And then you get into the investigations, and two of the investigators from the Army die in a plane crash, and you just see this. It's not hard to understand why somebody would choose a path that says, I'm willing to be a liar if that makes this go away. Mm-hmm. I'll be a hoaxer if that makes this go away. And then FBI doesn't care. They seal all the records. And so the narrative, the true story of Maury Island never enters the consciousness. Stories like Roswell, Ken Arnold's sighting, those are the narratives that have had a 50-year, think of it as a foot race, a 50-year head start.
Okay.
On their ownership, if you will, of the legacy of the history of UFO stories. And it's really hard to get people to open their minds and go, hey, we're not doing anything other than looking at the actual records that are available to us. And, you know, it's an interesting story and we should all pay attention. So that's what we're working on. That's why we made the movie.
So we kind of skipped over it real quick, but I want to hop back to the plane crash. Tell me, what's the story there?
Scott, you want to jump in there?
Sure. Two Army Air Force officers came up from California. I think they might have been asked by the FBI, or anyway, they got involved and went to the hotel in the Winthrop Hotel in Tacoma, where Ken Arnold had a room, and he had been doing, I believe, a week's worth of interviewing of Harold Dahl, Fred Chrisman, other people interested, and there was a couple of journalists at the Tacoma newspaper that were kind of following the story. And so William Davidson and Frank Brown came up to help. And so they were there on, I think, the last day or two. They had to be back on August 1st for the the Air Force Independence Day, because the Air Force was splitting off from the Army to be its own division. And so they were at the hotel. They were involved in the interviews. They took, I think they took did they have the cornflakes box that had the alleged slag in it?
They did. That's what they were given. That's what they were given.
So the slag was put in a cornflakes box. I just love that. Now, we didn't include that in this first, we consider it the first part of the story. But in the sequel, we hope to do, if anyone's out there interested in this, find us. We've already got the prop cornflakes box ready to go. And so they took that and they got on their B-25, which was like the, as Steve calls it, the Uber of the late 40s. There were all these B-25s left over from World War II, and a lot of people knew how to fly them, and so they were using them for investigations or travel or who knows. And so they got off, so they left the hotel. It was around midnight or so. They went to McCord. Then I believe it was just called Fort McCord, maybe. Anyway, and took off in their B-25 to head back to California. I think they were going to Hawthorne, California, near San Diego, the Air Force base there, for Air Force Independence Day. And so about 30 minutes into the flight, is it the left engine that caught fire?
Yep.
Left engine caught fire. They had picked up two other officers that wanted to go back to California, probably for the Air Force event. And they made sure those guys parachuted out. So unfortunately, sadly, Davidson and Brown were both killed when the plane spiraled and crashed in the forest outside of Kelso. Am I missing anything here, Steve?
No, I think you got it. I think that's right. I think it's interesting because as we try to track down additional documents, one of the interesting things we were able to discover was the Army's, not the FBI documents, but the Army's actual, what they call a final mission report. And that was the Army basically generating a report of what happened in this plane crash. And what's interesting about the mission report is that it is really precise in what the pilots, what Davidson and Brown had brought to the plane, because it documented what they had put in the manifest. So in the manifest of what they brought to the plane, they manifested basically the cornflakes box of this slag that had fallen off the UFOs at Maury Island as top secret cargo. That's what they wrote on the sheet. So they got and so the plane crashes, and in the final mission report, the Army did not let local law enforcement near the plane crash until they could get another intelligence officer to the site. And that intelligence officer was able to then find the navigator's kit and recover the top secret cargo and remove it. And when that happened, then they just let local law enforcement have it. And I just think that's a remarkable sort of, you really got to read between the lines. I mean, it's like 3 sentences, and then you think about it and you go, that's amazing.
Yeah.
They were going out, they were treating it seriously. What they had been handed as material from a UFO sighting. I mean, it's the first X-File. This is a UFO sighting, and people died, and FBI was investigating. Really interesting stuff. And the joke, when I do talking about this story, one of the kind of jokes I always tell people, always want to know, so what happened to it? You know, if they recovered the slag that was in the navigator's kit that they had labeled top secret cargo, where is it? And of course, we don't have any idea where it's at. But I always say we're pretty sure it's next to the Ark of the Covenant in that warehouse at the end of Indiana Jones.
Of course.
You never know.
Of course. That's what. No, that's great. So just for our listeners, when you're saying slag, so when I think of slag, I think of like a welder is welding and that material, kind of extra material that gets kind of knocked off from real high heat, right? It's you only get slag when you have really high heat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this was
I think that's how they were kind of generally using the term at the time. So the basic we kind of have skipped over the actual Maury Island sighting, but
right.
to super simplify it, Harold Dahl and his son and two day workers are on the boat. They're off Maury Island. They see six flying discs. One of them seems to be struggling. Ultimately, it is ejecting material over their boat. And they describe it as slag, and it's a molten material, just like you described. And that slag rains down on the boat. They're incredibly frightened. It burns Charles, Harold Dahl's son, on the arm. It kills the family dog Sparky, who they brought on the trip, and they run the boat aground and hide on underneath some cliffs on Maury Island. So, I mean, that's kind of the story around this. And so,
That's funny. We kind of skipped over
yeah, we did kind of. Sorry, listeners.
the actual story itself.
So great story. It's a great, phenomenal, UFO sighting story. And it's the next morning where Harold alleges that Man in Black showed up at his house and basically did what Men in Black kind of do. Took Harold to a diner and then gave him a warning and say, don't tell anybody anything about this. Told Harold everything that happened on the water the day before and said, don't talk. So that's where we get the whole I mean, that's another thing that just really inspired me about this entire project.
It's like the first mention of it, right?
First time, number one.
Yeah.
First Men in Black alleged encounter.
And what's your? I'll just ask Scott this question: Who do you think Men in Black are? Because just on this story, according to what he says is this person knew what happened, basically told him what had just happened to him. Is that correct, Scott?
Yes, yes, and I have a couple of thoughts on the Men in Black. I think there could be variations of what or who they were. For example, some could be FBI or CIA agents or NSA or even, a top secret division that's off book totally. Others could be aliens, could be interdimensional creatures. I mean, I've heard so many different descriptions. So my speculation on this one was that it's possible it was not an alien Man in Black. It was perhaps a military officer. And it's possible that they were doing an exercise with some new aircraft off of Maury Island, which probably barely had any residents at the time in 1947. So they could probably fly something from the Air Force Base, go over Puget Sound and do some loops and test it. And if they had an Army Air Force exercise on June 21, it's possible that Harold Dahl's boat, they were out scavenging logs, may have drifted, into this area without knowing what was going on. And maybe he was up, in a outlook somewhere on Maury Island with binoculars, and he said, who's this boat? Give me the numbers on this boat. I need to talk to this guy. So there's one explanation in a very, digestible, tangible worldview of what might have happened. He might have seen it, and then the next day he went and maybe wanted to intimidate him, and he dressed up in a black suit and showed up in a brand new Buick. Anyway, I don't have an answer who the Men in Black really are. I think there could be many different versions of them. Some could be alien or interdimensional. I mean, it's really hard to say what this one was, but I think you could explain it like I just did, that maybe it was a military exercise and they had an accident and he didn't want this person to, go to the papers and tell them that he saw this experimental aircraft. So, there's that, and but it's more fun to just in our storytelling, we kind of leave it open. We don't really tell you who the Men in Black is, the Man in Black. Uh, and I love that about a lot of different filmmakers do that, where it's like, David Lynch would never tell you what the film was about.
Right.
You interpret it your own way.
Right.
And so, we were trying to be very accurate to the FBI documents, and I'm a journalist, and Steve's a lawyer, and so we even filmed off the water where we thought the incident happened. So, and we made sure we had madrona trees and all these other little details. So, anyway, that's my
All right.
theory on the Men in Black.
Well, I'm the radio host, so I get to ask all these questions that you all didn't tell us about. So one of the things that one of the questions I had is there was other than him, there was the son that was on the boat who had an injury, and then there was two hands, right? Two other hands that were on the boat with him that day. Was there anything? Did anyone ever follow up later in life or later in time with any of those three? Like, I'm guessing, yeah.
As far as we know, the two hands, they're just day workers, and I'm kind of they're lost to history, just absolutely lost to it. No, nobody has. I've not seen a single even speculation on who they were, and it just sort of makes me think of, you might take your pickup to the hardware store and pick up some people who want a day work for cash, and you might introduce yourself and get their name, but you're not going to remember it tomorrow because they did 3 hours of work and then they're gone, right? So that appears to be what they were. Now I think Charles, Harold's son, is a whole different, classification.
But just going back to the day workers, I could just imagine me sitting at the bar drinking some tequila and some guys, couple of day workers sitting next to me telling me this freaking story.
Right.
I mean, these guys, if they were there and this happened, what a story they had to tell the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah. Kidding.
Anyway, back to Charles.
Charles, not a lot of information. Charles wasn't out there talking to the media or telling his version of any story. And there is some internet, well, he passed away in Louisiana, I think in the 70s. And there's some internet coverage where it's alleged that Charles, it's as a lawyer, it's really difficult. It's sort of somebody writes an internet blog and it's basically Maury Island exposed as a hoax, and then they basically rely on what someone else said about what Charles said. So it's hearsay on hearsay. It's like, telephone take. And so in this so-called interview with Charles, supposedly Charles said, well, my dad made it all up. So that is then interpreted by the current sort of blogger as, I've exposed it. See, Maury Island is a hoax. I've proven it. Those of us that have researched Maury Island are like, no, you haven't proven anything. What you've done is illustrated exactly what the Dahl family had agreed they would do, right? I mean, the whole point was the secret is Dad wants to be a liar, so he made it all up, right? So if Charles is telling someone who's interviewing him, my dad made it all up, he's doing what his dad wanted him to do. It's not an actual expose. And the person that wrote the blog, I don't think was even cognizant of any of the FBI records or any of this.
Right.
So that's the kind of stuff you're fighting through. And that's about it for Charles. There's just not information about it.
The skeptic would say, yeah, Charles' dad's dead. Charles is on his deathbed telling the story about what actually happened to him on Maury.
That's a good point. And I would also point out that in the same blog thread, so, this is where the internet, you just sort of shake your head and go, oh no. in the same thread, because people get excited and they write about UFOs. Buried down in the thread, there's someone who says that he was the interviewer. So remember I said it was a blog about an interview about talking to Charles. He said he was the interviewer, and he said in this thread, Charles never said that at all anyway. He never said my dad made it all up, you know. So who do you believe? So
Right.
even if you're the skeptic and you're saying Charles is finally telling an actual truth, you've got the interviewer saying, well, he didn't even say that in the first place. So that's inaccurate. So I just kind of throw my hands up and go, well, maybe we'll get more information in the future. But right now, Charles is not, useful for anybody from the standpoint of
Sure.
story.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so from what I understood, am I hearing right that you all are following up with the second part of this, or more to come on this? Did I hear you say that, or did I misunderstand that?
I said that with a tinge of hope in my
Okay.
language. We hope to do that. We are not currently doing that, but we have, an outline of treatment ready to go. And we think that focusing on the Winthrop Hotel and the interviews and the crash, there's a lot of this story that hasn't been told that is, really compelling stuff.
It's a very big,
So
yeah.
So
it's
so maybe then this question is something that you probably won't 100%. I'm guessing you're not going to answer me, but I'm going to throw it out. I'm going to ask anyway because so I obviously, because I do this show and I've had a lot of things happen to me in my lifetime that I can't explain. And already told some of those stories. I think I told my one UFO story on a previous episode, but so I've had things that happen to me that keeps me open um, to a lot of possibilities. Like I don't have a Bigfoot in my freezer, so I can't say for sure that Bigfoot exists. That would be cool if I did, wouldn't it? That would be really cool.
literally cool
It
in a
would be, yeah,
refrigerator.
yeah. But I've heard enough that makes me not say that it can't be possible. Um, and like I said, I'm watching the clock here, but I think we need to have another show because there's so many things that I want to move forward, and just especially with a lot of that stuff that's going on because it seems like we're back in UFO Central again. There's a lot going on right now. I have to admit I'm on Reddit, and which is a place to go down the rabbit hole. But I do see a lot of stuff going on. But so what's your? I mean, so can you just give me a little bit about your feeling of this specific story and how you feel about the possibility that it actually happened or not?
Well, sure we can. We get that question a lot. Scott, you want to go first? And then
Sure.
I'll
I
do-
think it did. I think something did happen. Whether it's aliens or not is impossible to, determine. I think it could be an experimental craft. There's rumors that the Nazis had a flying disc, right? So, I think it was Operation Paperclip where they brought all the rocket scientists back to America, and that became the building ground of the Manhattan Project and the Apollo missions and going to the moon and Werner von Braun. Anyway, it's possible they recovered a craft and wanted to see how to fly it and had an incident, and that's what this was. Or, at the time in June of 1947, Ken Arnold saw 9 more delta wing shaped craft. And, if you really get into UFOs, there's, supposedly different craft. There's, the sport model that Bob Lazar talked about at Area 51, and then Ken Arnold's flying disc. And then, these were more with a hole in the center. So it could be what? Those are different species. They're different models. You know, we all have different car models, so it could be that simple, or who knows? So there's a lot of mystery, and there's a lot of things that, you know, we'll never know until, of course, you know, there's actual disclosure. And then with that disclosure, maybe there will come some kind of, you know, ultimate proof, you know, that Roswell was real, that at the time they, you know, they recovered bodies. Here are the bodies. Here's, you know, the evidence. So I think we're all still waiting. We
Sure.
heard the hype over the last, what, 2 years.
Right.
And I thought we would have heard it by now, but you know.
And before I let Steve speak on this question, this to me, this case is unique. And I know there's been a few others. I know there was one in South America somewhere, where the UFOs, it felt like they were actually maybe trying to do harm, right? Like we haven't seen that only a few times where the people felt like they were being attacked or being. So this is kind of unique. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. I may be wrong on that, but there's not a lot of cases like that.
Well, I don't think these discs or whatever they were trying to harm Harold Dahl and his boat. I just don't believe it. I think it was just they witnessed something go wrong, is what it feels like from everything we've read. Right, Steve? Don't you think?
I've never felt that, you know, let's assume this happened, that it was malevolent in some way. It felt more like the craft's having a problem, or it's doing something it would ordinarily just do when nobody's watching and eject some material, whatever it was, maybe wrong place, wrong time kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of been my approach or my thinking. Harold Dahl, you know, talked to the FBI a lot. And I never heard him say he felt that he was being attacked. That's, you know, so he's not on the record saying they were after me. They were, you know, it was more like what, you know, just this crazy thing happening above their boat. So my answer to your question is, I guess it's a two-parter. One is on a much broader scale, not the specific story. You know, I haven't seen anything. I'm not an experiencer. I have never seen a UFO or a Sasquatch, you know, but I would love to. But my sense has always been one of open-mindedness. It just seems incredibly arrogant to just sort of say, I know everything there is to know, and these things don't exist. That seems like, oh my gosh, how can you be that arrogant? You know, I mean, just like the idea that we know everything about everything and we can now rule out aliens, that just is nuts to me. So I've got this open mind. Now, for our specific story, I have always kind of maintained a neutrality. I think it's almost like part of my DNA as a lawyer is to like follow the evidence. And the thing that satisfies me in this story is that what the evidence shows us is that it's a horrible historical mistake to kick Maury Island to the curb and somehow, you know, exclude it from UFO history and scholarship. And that's what's happened, right? What happened was, oh, there's hoax narratives out there. We'll never spend a minute on it. Let's write 5,000 books about Roswell. Mm-hmm. That's just insane. What we need is to have the narrative corrected so that people that love UFOs go, you know what? I'm gonna come to Washington for a couple of years and I'm gonna scour this story. You know, the kind of relentless scholarship that, you know, that people that love topics can find more information. We just don't have that for Maury Island. So that's my objective, is to sort of say, I'm open-minded. I'm not going to weigh in. And when we've got 1,000 books on Maury Island, I'm guessing we'll know a lot.
I'm going to have to shut her down here in a minute, but because of a lot of the other things that are going on, the interest has spiked again. I don't know if there's any reasons for that. I know a lot of people think a lot of the things a lot of people were freaking out because of the Cold War, which has caused a lot of people to have sightings and see things maybe that weren't there. I know there's a lot more things coming out with some of the congressional stuff that's come out and some new videos that keep popping up. But has the Maury Island incident become more in the front, other than what you all are doing with it?
Um,
Has there
I
been any?
mean, we seem to be getting some traction. Certainly in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of traction, so I guess it just takes some time. Um, we have I'll give the plug to the Men in Black Birthday Bash Festival. We're on year 4. It's actually a spin-off of this Burning Saucer that's on year 13, and it's from June. My gosh, the first event's in June 13th, and it runs through June 22nd.
Wow.
And the big party is at Quarterdeck in Des Moines on June 21st. It's cosplay, everybody dressed up like a men and women in black. We'll get a couple hundred people there, and we do a lot of storytelling as well as music. So if you like the world, it's a really fun place to be, experience one of those events. The other thing that we're doing, which I think is really interesting, is that we took a flyer as this. We feel like we're not even, if Roswell's Coca-Cola, we're not even Pepsi, right? I mean, we're not even like number 2.
We're
And
Cragmont.
we about a year ago, we sent a formal challenge to Roswell from basically all the UFO festivals in the state of Washington to debate them,
Wow.
the merits of the summer of 1947. And we got no answer, and several months went by, no answer. Our festival went by. Some other festivals in Washington went by. Roswell's festival went by. I pinged him a few more times. Finally, I get an email out of the blue from the writer at the Roswell Daily Record, same paper that they had in 1947 that has the famous photo. And all it says is, "We accept."
Whoa.
So
Gauntlet has been
October 10th,
Yeah.
October 10th, 2025, we have agreed to a neutral site to have a debate with Roswell. And that neutral site, but we knew we'd have to come to them, is Truth or Consequences, New
I've been
Mexico.
there. I've actually been there. Yeah.
It's a great little place. Yeah, but what a great place to do something like that. So it'll
Yeah.
be super fun, and that should help us get the word out a little bit. That our story is meritorious and worth some scholarship. So we're getting there, but I'm learning it's hard to change a historical narrative when you've got a 50-year gap of.
Well, all right, so we got to end this, and I will post a link on the. I'm sure there's something I can put out there about the Men in Black Birthday Bash that's coming up, and I have never been anything like that before UFO wise, so I'm excited to partake. I thank you both for coming on. I would love to have you back because I literally have a whole list of questions that other people have asked me to ask that I didn't get to today. And I know Scott, with your involvement with the show Sightings, and there's a lot of other things that you have interest in. So I would love to get you back on the show sometime if you all would be willing to do that.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Sound great.
Fun. Thank you.
So thank you too. Just a reminder that this show would not happen without the Highline Heritage Museum. I'm sitting in the haunted museum as we speak. It's very sweetly haunted, so don't let that stop you from coming. And because and I know Scott can attest to this, it's a great little museum with so much to offer. Nancy does an amazing job here, and y'all need to come down and take a look. It's a diamond in the rough. So
It is.
get down here to the Highline Heritage Museum. Thank you both again. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your film, which So wait, real quick, can people watch the film? How do they watch the film?
Yes, just go to MauryIslandIncident.com and there's a link to view it online.
All right, there you go. It's worth it. I saw it. It's well done.